that government tells us. That's a problem. And I couldn't have said that better myself. It is why the Second Amendment cannot be abridged, cannot be weakened, because it allows you to keep all the rest of it. Of those fundamental rights is the one we call the pursuit of happiness. That's sort of a complicated right, because it doesn't have just one word. That's about property and prosperity. Now, to really understand the pursuit of happiness, we need to move to the end of the sentence where those rights were enumerated. And the end of that sentence says, in order to protect the rights you came here with, governments were instituted among men, and that governments exist with what's called the consent of the governed. What does that mean? It means that it's like a contract between the citizen and the government. You have endowed rights. We need a government to do certain things so that society is stable, so that we can live freely and enjoy our endowed rights. So we form a contract with the government. In a contract, each side gives something and each side gets something. What do you give? You give money. That's taxes. And you give a little bit of freedom away. What do you get? You get an army, because most of us don't have our own armies. I mean, I have 5 sons. I'm pretty close. But most of us don't have our own armies. You probably don't have your own sewer system in your backyard. And you probably didn't build your own interstate. So there are things that government does for us. And those things are important and necessary. It is why governments are instituted. And as long as, in our nation, both sides abided by the contract, this nation worked. But what we've seen in the past decades is both sides have not abided by the contract. Government is trying to rewrite it because they want to be bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. But we've rewritten it too. Because in the contract, we were the boss. The guardian of liberty was the citizen. It was our job to hold the government accountable and responsible. And we didn't. We didn't. We elected people again and again and again that we knew were crooks. That we knew didn't do their job. That we knew didn't listen. We didn't bother to learn the issues. Well, in any employer-employee relationship, the employer evaluates the employees. Now, over the years, I've done lots of trainings for businesses and nonprofits and management kind of things. I can walk into a company, and after I've been there for about 10 minutes, I can tell you lots of things about that company. I can tell you if the boss of that company values punctuality. Because if the boss does, when I walk in at 9 in the morning, everybody's at their desk, they have their coffee, their computer's open, and they're typing away. If the boss is a lot more laid back, people are strolling in somewhere around 20 after. They're chatting at the water cooler. You would know that too. Because everybody does the things that they're allowed to do. Because that's how we behave. We have allowed government to get out of hand. Because we didn't honor our end of the contract either. We didn't pay attention. We didn't watch. We didn't participate. When you have voter turnout, in the last election here in Pennsylvania, it was 21%. That's pathetic. Why would they pay attention? In Delaware County, in the judicial election that just happened, voter turnout was 7%. 7%. Why would elected officials listen to you if you don't care enough to say anything? So we didn't honor the contract. They didn't honor the contract either. They grew and they grew and they grew. Now, part of the contract is structural. When those guys came together and wrote that document, they came together, about 13 years later, and they said the Declaration was a really good thing. How do we make it work? How do we build a government that puts the Declaration into practice? And they wrote a how-to manual. We call that the U.S. Constitution. The Constitution is the how-to manual for the Declaration. It tells us how to make the Declaration real. And when they put it together, at the end, they talked about a structure in Washington, and at the end, they talked about enumerated powers. And what they said was, Washington has certain jobs. But if this isn't a job that we've given to Washington, the state is supposed to do it. That's the 10th Amendment. That's what sovereign states is about. That these things are supposed to happen at the state level. Why? To understand why, let's look at what's happening in Washington. Now, we've all heard the words government of the people, by the people, for the people. We don't have that today. We have government of the special interest group, by the special interest group, for the special interest group. How come? Because when power is centralized in Washington, the special interest groups understand that they can ignore everything that everybody else in the country says, and they can focus their firepower on 535 people, the 435 in the House and the 100 in the Senate, and they ignore everybody else. What if we returned power to the states? The first thing that would happen would be you would break the stranglehold of the special interest groups in Washington. Because I don't care how big your special interest group is, you can't lobby 50 state legislatures at the same time. It's way too big. So you break a stranglehold in Washington. You make the voice of the citizen louder and stronger. Why? Because when people want to run for office at the state level, what do? They knock on doors. You know, we had people running for state rep in the last session, and I had people, hello, Mrs. Luksik, they were on my porch. You can actually run for state rep that way. In the last session, a guy named Tim Krieger down in Westmoreland County was a Republican who won the Democratic seat. He didn't raise nearly as much money as his opponent. He wore out 6 pairs of shoes. He literally knocked on 10,000 doors. He is the sitting state rep in his district. You can run for state rep that way, and you can win. You get to the U.S. Senate, not so much. I can't knock on enough doors, even if I knocked on them every single day from now until the election, because there's millions of them. So the lower the government, the easier it is for you to change it, to make a difference. In almost every state, except for California, well, it's California, you can reach your state capital in a day. So you can go and visit. You can go and see what they're doing. You can sit in on the session. You can get to Harrisburg. You guys can get there in 15 minutes, no big deal. But I can get there in 3 hours. And when I'm working on something, I'm there every week. Because I can get there and back in a day. When it's done at the state level, citizens can come and see what they're doing. Sunshine's a really good thing. So being able to come and see makes a difference. We don't have a monolithic country. When Washington passes a law, it's one law and everybody's stuck with it. Gee, there aren't a lot of places where Florida and Alaska have the same needs or strengths or weaknesses. But when Washington passes a law, they're equally bound. The idea of sovereign state, of letting states run things at the state level, allows states to tailor the laws to meet the needs and address the strengths and weaknesses of that state. It also limits mistakes. Governments are made by men make mistakes. Wouldn't it be better to have it in one state instead of the whole country? And then if you're in the neighboring state, you can go, you know what, how come gas over there is 30 cents and here it's $5? What are you guys doing? It's a lot easier to hold yourself accountable, and states learn from each other. So it's like you have 50 state laboratories happening all the time. It limits bureaucracy, because there's only one level. They understood that the structure of government matters. Now, what would happen if we did that? Let's take energy as an issue, kind of an important issue. We didn't have a U.S. Department of Energy until 1977 in this country. There wasn't one. Energy was run at the state level, and we had 700,000 coal miners. But oil was coming from the Middle East. So the Department of Energy was created, and their stated mission was twofold: to free us from dependence on foreign oil, and to develop alternative and renewable sources of energy for America. In 1977, 7% of our energy came from alternative and renewable sources. Last year, the Department of Energy's budget was $26.5 billion, and they had 16,000 employees. Are we free of dependence on foreign oil? Not hardly. It's not even worth discussing. And we get 6.7% of our energy from alternative and renewable sources. If you had a business and you had a department that cost you $26.5 billion, and their failure rate was the failure rate of the U.S. Department of Energy, you would close it. They are getting a raise. So what would happen if we would free energy?